In this presentation, we're going to continue on with the vendor section, looking at one of the major forms, that being the bill form. Let's engage with Sage 50 Cloud Accounting. Here we are in our practice file within the Sage 50 accounting software. You should be able to follow along with this in the demo version. We're in the customer and sales section. We're going to be jumping on down here to the vendor and purchases section. Vendor and purchases section, we took an overview of it last time. Now we're going to take a look at some of the major forms within it. So if we're not dealing with inventory, then the major forms within the purchases section or the vendor section, the vendors are who we buy from. The purchases section, because we buy stuff typically in the purchases section, we buy from, obviously, the vendors, or you might call it the AP cycle, or accounting cycle, or even expense cycle possibly. And the two major components will be the entering of the bills and the paying of the bills. Now remember, when you enter the bills, that's going to be making sure that the result of that form will be that the accounts receivable will be, or the accounts payable will be increasing, that we owe people money. And the other side will typically be like an expense if you're purchasing something that, or if you're paying for something that's going to be on the expense side. Then when we pay the bill, obviously the accounts payable will be going down, and the other side being cash going down as well. So if we go into the enter bill, let's take a look at the enter bill, and we're going to say we want a new bill. We're going to be entering a new bill. And I'll make this large here, and I'm just going to pick a vendor. Now, we might have to set up vendors as we go, so you might have, new or different vendors as you go through this. I'm going to pick a vendor that we currently have, so I'm going to pick just basically the first vendor. We'll tab through this information. Notice the types of things we need to set this up, similar to the types of things we need to set up when we're talking about an invoice, right? We need the customer for the invoice. Over here, we need the vendor. So we'd have to either set one up or have one that we're picking already. Then once we set up that vendor, then the information will be populated. So if we need, say, the shipping address and all this kind of information, we will have that. If we're shipping, then we're going to need that for our major vendors. However, if you're talking about like Verizon or like, just paying the phone bill or something like that, it may well be the case that we don't have as much information in the vendors. We may not need to know what their address is and whatnot if you're talking about simply vendors that you're paying monthly bills to. If you're talking about vendors that you're buying inventory from and that kind of thing, then of course you'll need more data in it. So then I'm going to set up the date, and let's put this on the, let's say, the 17th. So I'll go with the 17th. So due, I'm going to say 4/17. And note down here we have two tabs. We have apply to a purchase order and apply to purchases. So a purchase order would mean that we already had set up a purchase order for this particular vendor, for this particular amount, and now we got received it. So, and if we don't have a purchase order, so that would be in effect if we had inventory. If we had inventory involved and we had a system set up where we had a purchase order first requesting the inventory, then you imagine receiving the inventory with basically the bill from the vendor on it. We would then enter the bill and connect that to the purchase order. Or if we're talking about a situation where we're just creating a bill, it's not of something that we had a purchase order for, then we will simply go right into the bill information. Now I'm going to put quantity, let's make it just, let's do 5 again on the quantity. Item, I'm going to say it's going to be a birdhouse kit, again, so birdhouse kit, and I'm going to say tab. Now these items, when you're talking about a bill, would typically be used if you're buying something like inventory again. If you're not buying inventory, you may not have an item if you're entering a bill for something other than an inventory item. If you are dealing with inventory, then you need the item number, because the bill is now the thing that's going to be putting this on the books for inventory if you're using a perpetual inventory system. So if you're using a perpetual inventory system, we would then need the items to be set up, and if you're purchasing inventory, so that it can then track the inventory and put this information on the books. Again, if you're paying something like the phone bill or something like that, then of course you just basically need the vendor on it. You don't need much more on the description. You're not going to need, of course, an inventory item in that case. So we have the GL account that's going to be affected, and in this case it being a inventory account. For the GL account, if I select the item, it's going to be an inventory account populated by us just entering in this data. The amount, the $279.50, so that's going to be it. So what's going to happen when we record this, it's going to be increasing the accounts payable, and the other side is going to be going to the inventory. I'm just going to put an invoice number here, so I'm going to put an invoice number, and this may be coming, so I'll keep that as is. All right, then we're going to go ahead and save this, and then let's open up our reports and check them out. So I'm going to close this back up top, and notice again we're working with open windows down below. So now I'm back to just having the one open window open. I'm going to go to the reports drop down. We're going to go on down to the forms. So let's go to the financial statements. Take a look at our major financial statements. Let's take a look at the old balance sheet statement. So we'll take a look at the balance sheet first. So we're going to go on to the balance sheet reports. We'll open up the balance sheet report here. I'm going to be choosing the current period, so I'm going to keep it at that current period and then open up this report. So I'm going to say OK, and then here is our report. I'll make this large, and we have entered a bill, so we know that we're going to have the accounts payable is going to be the major thing that typically will go up. That's going to be in the liability section. So down here in the liability, there's our payable, the 80,000. I'm going to be double clicking on that. That'll give us our information. So if I go all the way down to the bottom here, we had our transaction. I believe this is the one on 3/17. And note, of course, you can drill down on that by double clicking it as well. And there is our bill showing as unpaid. So I'm going to close this back up. Now, because we bought inventory, the other side of this bill will be up in the inventory section. So if I go back up top, it's going to be in inventory. So there's the inventory, double clicking on it and scrolling back down to the bottom. See if I can pull this back down this time. Save us some scrolling time. So we'll scroll. No, it didn't pull. It didn't pull. Let's try it again. So we'll pull that on down. And here it is on the 3/17. We have the 279.50. So I can close this one back out. Now also note that if we're talking about the accounts payable account, we see that if you double click on the accounts payable, that will take you into the information, the GL, but you also need to know who you owe the money to. So if you're going to imagine you're working for someone here in the AP department, they're going to be asking you, how much money do we owe people? We say 80,156. Then they're going to ask, well, who do we owe and when do we owe it to them? Well, then we need more data. We need a different report for this because the GL's not going to do it. That's by date. So we're going to have a similar kind of report as we had with the accounts payable or the accounts receivable, giving us the details. So let's open up a aged payable, for example. We'll open up the aged payable, and this is going through March, and this is going to show us basically who we owe and how old the items are. And then if we're going to scroll all the way down to the bottom of this, we're going to get to our bottom line number, which is the 80,350.56. 80,350.56. Does that tie out to what we had over here? It's a little bit off, right? We're at the 80,150, and there's a couple things that could throw that off. Note that the things that will typically throw it off are if we're going to enter something into accounts payable and not have a vendor that's going to be applied to the transaction. So if something gets input into accounts payable without a vendor, such as like an adjusting entry, then it could be that these two things get thrown off. And note, you don't want to typically have that be the case. You want to, every time you do something to accounts payable, to record a vendor for it so that the system can then be generating another report that will calculate this information and support the accounts payable by who we owe, that being the vendor information. Now, in this case, we purchased inventory, so of course the inventory would also have a supporting document. We won't go into it again. We took a look at it in a prior presentation, but we'd also need to support this information not just by the GL, but also by the information with regards to inventory, what types of inventory we are purchasing and how many of those units we have on hand. Now, if we go back on over, note that you can also enter a bill. If we were to enter another bill and say we want to a new bill, and we could enter a bill to something like the phone company or something like that. So like let's say Verizon, we're going to enter a bill to. And if Verizon isn't set up as a vendor, then we can say we need a new vendor and add a new vendor kind of as we go within the system. The vendor, of course, being who we're going to be paying to. Now, note, again, if you take a look at a vendor, this is going to be a large data input screen. I put in vendor, Verizon, all right? A large data input screen that you'll typically need, as much information, any other contact information. This will be similar to the customer screen where we have the contact information, the address, and so on and so forth. If you're looking and using large vendors, then of course you want to have this whole thing populated out here. If you're talking about smaller vendors that you're paying like the monthly phone bill or something like that, you may not need all the information. So we have the address, history, purchase information, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. I said save and new, but I just need to save. A valid account must be selected. So I'm going to go to the account, the expense account. I'm going to put in the telephone. See if we have a telephone expense. So let's see here. So I just put it into utilities. So this would be the standard kind of expense account that we would be put into for this particular vendor expenses. I'm going to put it into the utilities expense. So then again, I'm going to try to save it, see if it allows me to save it this time. And say, all right, I think it did. So then I'm going to pick that up. And then down here, I'm just going to be putting this as the telephone in the description. I don't need an item because the item is, we're not buying an inventory item. So then I'm going to put here utilities. So that's going to be account 77000, the utilities account. And then I'm going to put the amount. And there we have it. So I'm going to record this. What's this going to do? It's going to increase the accounts payable again, but the other side this time going to an expense rather than an inventory account. So I'm going to say telephone. Let's go ahead and save that. And I don't think I entered a number here, so I need a number in the invoice number. Now let's go ahead and save it and see what happens. So I'm going to close this back out. And then I'm going to go back to our reports. So if I go back to our reports, then I can close this report. I don't need that one. I'm going to open up the balance sheet. And then in the balance sheet, if we go on down to the liabilities section down here, if we're in the liabilities, we're going to see the telephone. So I'll scroll down to the bottom here. And there's the Verizon on the 315. So that's going to be the similar or the same as our prior bill. The difference here is that on the other side, it's going to be going to the income statement. So let's go back over to our reports. I'm going to go to our reports. I want to take a look at the income statement, and I'll typically be picking up, let's go back to the financials. So I want to go to the financials here, financial statements, and I pick up the income statement. This is the one I want. So I'll pick up the standard income statement. I don't want to show zero amounts on it. I'm going to keep the current period, so that looks good. I'm going to say OK. And then I'm going to maximize this screen. We're going to go down to the utilities. So let's scroll on down to the utilities. There's the utilities. If I double click on the utilities, we're going to see there's our transaction. There's the 11,000. So now it's on the income statement side of things. So that's going to be our bill. That's going to be it for now. Let's get out of here.